Hey, Chris here from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Welcome to the first episode of the New England and New York chapter's Conservation Cooperative. So, as the title suggests, this is a show about conservation, where we will explore our work to ensure North America's outdoor heritage of hunting and fishing in a natural setting. In doing so, we aim to provide perspectives and voices beyond just our own, hopefully painting a richer picture of the complexity and nuance of the issues facing our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. In this episode, we're going to take a look at an issue the New England BHA chapter has been grappling with for a few years: the rapid development of recreational trails and their encroachment on wild places. We'll explore some of the factors that are driving trail development in the state of Vermont and hear how it fits into the bigger picture of conservation. Now, let's be clear, we are all trail users. We think they're great, and there are clearly benefits to everyone from individuals to communities at large. But it's well documented that they negatively impact wildlife, fragment habitat, and put a persistent human presence where there wouldn't otherwise be one. Meet New England BHA board member Ethan Dreisigacker.
This is actually how I got involved with BHA in the beginning. I was a skier, a semi-professional skier biathlete for like 5 years, and I've been a competitive skier for 30 years. And I mountain bike and I run, I'm a trail user. And then I think, and I got more and more into hunting. I think I became more and more aware of the effects that my presence has on wildlife. And I think that's where I sort of started to realize, most of the time when you're recreating on a trail, you're not thinking about that. And to me, that's sort of where this becomes an issue, is it's not really necessarily about the physical infrastructure directly. It's about the human presence on the landscape that comes with it.
Hunters know better than anyone that a person's presence has an impact on wildlife. That's why the first sit in the deer stand is always the best sit. This is why we observe things in wild places that other outdoor users never see. When we are in the woods, we're not passing through the natural system, we are part of it. Meredith Naughton is a researcher studying the impacts of recreational trail use on wildlife.
When we add recreation trails, and I'm specifically talking about constructed dirt trails in the woods. When we add trails to an environment that didn't have them before, that is a change. It creates a disturbance in that environment that was not there before. And it's a linear, repeated disturbance where, whether it's one person a day or 100 people a day, it is a predictable change to the environment in one area. And that change generally has a negative impact on wildlife. And that negative impact could be really just immediate and behavioral, or it could be a sustained population impact.
I feel we should acknowledge before we go too far down the trail that our forests are under an onslaught of threats. And these things are having ecosystem-wide impacts. For context, I spoke with Allison Adams, director of the Forest Ecosystem Monitoring Cooperative out of UVM, which studies the Northeast forests in a broad and comprehensive manner.
I think in terms of what's having the biggest impact on forest health, recreation is not it. I think issues like climate change, the ever-increasing number and abundance of invasive pests and pathogens, those are really serious impacts on forest health. That said, a lot of those are not very, I don't want to say they're not actionable. Of course they're actionable at a state level, at a federal level, and I would, action on those, please, of course. Recreation is this lever that I think is really easy and direct for a lot of land managers to pull. And so even if it's not the place that's going to necessarily have the biggest impact, I think there absolutely is an impact. There is an impact on soil health. We're working on answering the question about what it means for stress on trees. There probably is some stress on trees, and we don't necessarily know exactly what that is. There is some ability to spread invasive pests. And that's often recreationally connected. And so there definitely are very important impacts.
Ask any hunter or angler why they hunt and fish, and somewhere near the top of the list is going to be something like to enjoy or connect to nature. But the same is true for mountain bikers, hikers, dog walkers, bird watchers, skiers, rock climbers, snowmobilers, paddlers, surfers. You get the idea. Basically, everyone who does stuff outside. The fact is, lots of people like to be outside, and that's a good thing. Certainly better than the alternative, indoors and disconnected from the natural world. In a place like Vermont, connection to the outdoors is what the culture is all about. Vermont has a thriving outdoor recreation economy. In fact, in 2021, Vermont's GDP from outdoor recreation rose to 4.1%, the third highest in the nation behind Hawaii and Montana. Outdoor rec is big business in the Green Mountain State.
I am a direct beneficiary of it. I work in the outdoor industry. This is not something that I think is bad. I think if we're going to develop the economy, there are a lot worse ways that we could do this.
That is Dave Furman, BHA Vermont volunteer and outdoor industry executive.
Several years ago, Vermont was one of the first states to form an office of the state government around fostering outdoor recreation, growing the outdoor recreation economy, and put together a working group of people within the state to work on it.
In 2017, Governor Phil Scott established the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, also known as VOREC. The objective is to, quote, grow and drive sustainable development in Vermont's outdoor recreation sector by leveraging natural outdoor recreation assets, brand, and culture. In case you're wondering, natural outdoor recreation assets are forests, rivers, streams, mountains, basically Vermont's natural or undeveloped places. Since its inception, the makeup of VOREC has leaned towards individuals who represent businesses, industries, and organizations that are connected to trail-based recreation, and the recommendations of the collaborative have reflected this. One of its earliest recommendations was the formation of a private sector nonprofit, the Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance, or VOBA, which among other things allows the Vermont outdoor industry a more effective means to lobby for policy that supports growth in the sector. But who is fueling this growth? Well, VOREC, VOBA, and other recreation groups routinely state that what they do is for the benefit of Vermonters, whether that be for their health and well-being, for jobs, or for recreational opportunities. But the reality is 61% of the users of the premier trail networks in Vermont are non-residents. I asked Nick Bennett, Executive Director of the Vermont Mountain Bike Association, also known as VIMBA, about this reality.
It's actually one of the first questions we reckoned with a little bit as we thought about the strategic plan. Who are our constituents? Who do we serve as an organization? And really honing in, and it's our membership. We're a membership organization here. We already have 13 million visitor visits a year for folks coming into the state. We do not view ourselves needing to drive more people into Vermont. So that's not to say we don't want those folks to come, but it's not our mission is not to bring more people into the state of Vermont.
Research conducted by VIMBA and the University of Vermont showed that there are approximately 50,000 Vermonters who mountain bike at least once a week during the season. And while VIMBA recognizes that this is their core constituency, they are aware that some people are being left out of Vermont's recreational opportunities.
There are groups of people that we are really trying to recruit to come in the state, the historically underrepresented populations. Vermont is not a very heterogeneous place. It's not a diverse state. And so we think about how can folks that have not been represented in the sport, color of their skin, physical abilities, like how can we drive a more diverse and inclusive member group here. But so it's definitely, there are specific populations that we're really trying to recruit, but generally we have plenty of people that come here to do all kinds of things, so less around just mobilizing general tourism.
Plenty of people do come to Vermont as a result of trail-based recreation. Actually, 86% of Vermont visitors come for the trails, and when they visit, they open their wallets. An economic analysis study conducted by the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council showed visitors to just 4 of Vermont's trail networks, Long Trail, Vasa, Kingdom Trails, and Catamount Trail, generate over $15 million annually in sales related to their visits. Those are expenses like food, lodging, and equipment. Along with that spending comes an associated state tax revenue of over $2 million. So, clearly there's an economic incentive to invest in trails. Not only that, there is seemingly more money than ever available to build them. But there are complications. Unlike many trail destinations out west, the majority of multi-use trails in Vermont are on private land, and there are legal mechanisms in place that sometimes hinder development, like Act 250.
Act 250, which is the general land use law for Vermont that's been on the books since early 1970s, is a very good thing. It's the reason that Vermont looks the way it does when you drive down the interstate, when you go through our communities. It's really forced thoughtful development. A specific trail project can disturb up to 10 acres of earth before it triggers an Act 250 permit, but eventually it will if you get a big enough or a long enough section of trail. And that's actually one of the key interesting points here is Act 250 was never developed to govern linear development. It's about plot-based development, a housing complex or a building or a parking lot, things like that. So acreage is really the language of Act 250 in terms of triggers.
VIMBA and other trail groups are working to exempt trail projects from Act 250 because once triggered, it places an encumbrance on a property. And when you're trying to convince a landowner to allow trail development, that can be kind of a hard sell. Ultimately, the law is onerous for trail builders as it discourages connectivity and leads to smaller and more confined trail networks. But for advocates of trailless areas, Act 250 might be an important speed bump when evaluating a trail project. Here's Meredith Naughton again.
Big thing to consider and hang your hat on is that expansion of trails into the landscape, dispersed trails, the space over which trails extend has a greater impact than the density of trail development. So I know we're on radio, so to explain that, like if you've got 5 miles of trails, it's a greater impact if you spread them across 5 square miles of land rather than 1 square mile of land.
What about those landowners? Open access to private land is a long tradition in Vermont, especially for dispersed recreation. But building a trail that sees a steady stream of users is an entirely different thing.
First of all, I think people need to be able to enjoy their property, and if building a trail and having their forest roads open allows them to do that and get in and manage their property and explore, then that's really important.
That's Andrea Shortsleeve, a private lands habitat biologist for Vermont Fish and Wildlife. We spoke about the conversations she has with landowners about how their property might serve the greater good, whether that be for wildlife habitat, public recreational opportunities, or both.
I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and look at this kind of landscape perspective of where their property sits in these large forest blocks that Vermont has a lot of. And so, one landowner comes to mind over in the Northeast Kingdom who wanted to open part of his property up to bike and backcountry skiing, but also had a lot of areas that didn't have trails in them already. And so just talking to them about the fact that trailless areas in the state are a limited resource and they're not renewable, right? Once a trail goes in, a trail is there. And so if a landowner can kind of contain where the trails are on their property and kind of keep them in a condensed area and then leave spaces that are untrailed and not necessarily open and inviting to the public, then that is probably the best way to kind of have the two worlds meet. And just trying to keep the density of the trails and the disturbance in one area.
Trails have been an important mechanism for conserving land throughout the Northeast. Take Vermont's Long Trail, for example. It's the oldest long-distance trail in the United States, and it's responsible for conserving 25,000 acres, which includes some of Vermont's only higher elevation habitat. It's taken a long time and a lot of cooperative work from NGOs, state and federal agencies, local municipalities, and private landowners to make happen. There is a collection of Vermont-based trail groups that are hoping to replicate the impact of the Long Trail with the creation of a new legacy trail project called Velomont.
High in the Green Mountains of Vermont, a new trail and hut system is being blazed for a new era. It is an innovative collaboration that champions the values of recreation, inclusion, access, equity, conservation, opportunity.
That's a clip from a promo video for Velomont. You can probably imagine the visuals: buffed single track, a collection of happy, fit people, and lots of green. Here's RJ Thompson from Vermont Huts, who, along with VIMBA, Catamount Trails Association, and the Velomont Trail, make up the Velomont Trail Collective.
One of the neat things about Vermont Huts and our partners, the Velomont Trail Collective, is as we build out this trail and hut network, the Trust for Public Land, which is a conservation org, they've analyzed that the corridor through which the trail will pass presents an opportunity to conserve a little over 200,000 acres of unprotected land. And of course, you'll have your main corridor and artery, but then there's the acreage surrounding that trail and hut network that would become protected.
Here it is in a nutshell. A hut-supported multi-use trail designed with mountain bikes in mind that spans the length of Vermont from Massachusetts to the Canadian border. Over 485 miles of trails, some new, some existing. 30 new huts connecting 23 communities. Nick Bennett from Vermont Mountain Bike Association again.
Velomont will connect a lot of existing trail, but be new trail in these areas that lack those connections. As the trail leaves those population centers, it becomes more heritage, we don't need bike park berms way out in the middle of the Green National Forest. That doesn't fit in the landscape. But generally, first of all, from a design principle, becoming more and more sort of heritage as you get deeper into the backcountry.
As I said in the beginning, we're all trail users here. I'm a mountain biker. In fact, I've done a couple of these long remote rides in other parts of the country. I basically sought these places out to ride. The sense of adventure and the challenge, I totally get it. But I'll admit, when I'm riding, my view of the world around me gets pretty narrow. I'm focused on the trail and not much else. Here's Ethan again.
The mountain bike community has gotten really good at building trails that have relatively low physical impacts when it comes to water and drainage and stuff like that. They're getting really good at building trails. But to me, it's sort of okay, the physical trail was never really that big a problem. It's what comes after. It's the traffic on the trail and the people using it having understanding of really it's just an awareness and an acknowledgement of the fact that when you ride a bike through a piece of woods, the woods knows.
Working on this topic, I've spoken to all sorts of trail user groups. And even though there are some deeply shared values regarding the outdoors, where there seems to be a bit of divergence is how we define concepts like stewardship and conservation. Here's Ethan with more.
A lot of the stewardship that gets talked about by trail users is about maintaining that physical infrastructure, and it doesn't really often address the impacts of that infrastructure's use and just the presence of the people using the trails. I don't want to come off as being anti-trail. I think trails are important. I think we need more trails, but I think that they need to be in the right places. And I think that the people using them and building them need to be thinking about the effects of their users.
So how do we bridge the gap in perspective in our individual land ethics? Meredith Naughton suggests continued dialogue and education is critical.
So let's really lay down some specifics about how we're going to do it. So I think just continuing to talk about it brings it into everyone's ear. But I think also making the ecology of place inextricable from recreation is so important. When we have mountain bike clinics for children, spend an hour talking about where you are and what else lives there. I think that just bringing it up in every conversation about developing a natural resource will get us all just thinking about it a little bit more, assuming that those compromises will be made because we're both protecting and developing at the same time.
RJ from Vermont Huts has a similar sentiment.
I just think we have to keep talking like this because I think we'll realize that we actually have a lot in common, and there's just more opportunity to get more meaningful work done if we all work together and identify the areas that we all really value and we all really care about, and just better understand what each faction is looking for and looking to protect. And odds are, I bet we'll land on the same areas that we want to protect, and just keep talking about it and become less divisive and use less polarizing rhetoric that has unfortunately somehow worked its way from national politics all the way down into things as simple as playing outside. So that's where I would leave it.
Like nearly all conservation topics, the impacts of trails and trail development is a rich one. I mean, I barely scratched the surface on the research. There's some really interesting stuff out there, and we'll continue to learn more with each study. Plus, there is a very compelling political ecology angle on this topic. There's a big demographic and cultural shift playing out in Vermont, as well as other rural parts of the Northeast. As is the case of trail development and the budding recreational economy, it's often being driven by individuals who aren't native Vermonters. That's not an indictment, it's just an observation of a friction point I've seen play out firsthand. So, where does BHA and the New England chapter go from here? The simple answer is continued engagement. Our outdoor traditions are highly regulated and scientifically managed. We are used to working under a framework of seasons and bag limits and things like that. But we need to recognize that other outdoor users are not. Finding common ground, keeping the channels of communication open, and being a voice for wildlife and wild places will be a must. Hey, a real big thank you to everyone I spoke to in the making of this episode. I appreciate everyone's willingness to come to the table and talk about this topic. I will provide a list of the names of everyone and links to their respective organizations in the show notes. Music for this episode was from Blue Dot Sessions. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a month with another episode. In the meantime, keep up to date with the New England and New York chapters on their respective Instagram accounts. Also, if you're not already a member or you need to renew, do it right now. Head over to backcountryhunters.org and please take care of that. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you again and take care.